Okay, good morning. So we are doing today Taanit Chav Amud Aleph, and we are on Chav Zayin Amud Beis, or a bunch of about halfway down in the wide lines. So the Gemara says, based upon what we said in the Mishnah, that they used to lay in different parts of Bereshis every day by the Anshe Maimed. So the Mishnah says, B'Yom Rishon they would read Bereshis, and then the Bereshis Bar Lakim, and then the next parsha right after that, which is Yehira Kia B'Sei Chamayim. So says the Gemara, Tana Bereshis B'Shnayim Yehira Kia B'Echad. When they would do aliyahs, so they would have two people oila for the first parish in Bereshis, and then they would have one person for the second parish in Bereshis. So two people would be Bereshis Bar Lakim, and one person would be Yehira Kia B'Sei Chamayim. What's not clear to me from after reading all this is, okay, I understand that this wasn't like every day and wasn't in every shul, but like the people in the regular shul they who were in the minyan, they wouldn't have a regular laning. It would just be like the Anshe Maimon would do their thing. You would have two lanings, like for everybody else, like the regular laning for the week. I don't know. So the Gemara says, Tana Bereshis B'Shnayim, Yirakia Be'echad, Bishlam Yirakia Be'echad. Says the Gemara makes sense that this third person who's Oila would read Yehiraki alone. Why? Because lots of psukim have it, because it is three psukim in fact. El Bereshis B'Shnayim, but Bereshis with having two Oilam, how does that work? Hey psukim Havian, it is in fact five psukim. Utanana Kerbetar, Yifres Megim psukim, we know that when somebody gets an aliyah, they can't have less than three psukim in their aliyah. And generally we say that it shouldn't be less than 10 psukim for three oilam. Like I said, the big exception being on Purim. But over here, what we're saying is, in fact, you have five psukim and two oilam, but if each has to do a minimum of three, how do you get to two oilam? Zat the Gemara, Rav Amar Doileg or Shmuel Amar Pesach. Rav Machlekes Rav and Shmuel. According to Rav, we're Doileg. What do? We basically lane the pasuk, and then the first three psukim for the first guy, and then the second guy comes along and he lanes the last three psukim, meaning the last pasuk of the first guy and the first pasuk of the second guy are the same. It's just repeating it. That's Rav's position. And Shmuel says pasuk. What does Shmuel say? Shmuel says that you take the third pasuk and read only half of it, like up to the snachta. And then the second person reads from the snachta and on, so you don't repeat yourself. But essentially, you have two oilim, each reading separate, not nobody going over the same words. And the way you manage that is you have 2.5 psukim for the first guy, 2.5 psukim for the second guy. You get 5 psukim. That's how it works. So machlekes here between Rav and Shmuel, if you say Doileg or you say Pesach. Now the Gemara wants to explain. Rav Amar Doileg. According to Rav, who says that what you do is repeat. You repeat the third pasuk, right? The first guy has ended by the third pasuk, and the second guy starts by the third pasuk. My time Amar pasuk. Why doesn't he say that you just make a stop in the middle of the third pasuk? Just do 2.5 psukim. Whatever pasuk was not already created by Moshe Rabbeinu, we're not going to create. In other words, when you're stopping in the middle of a pasuk, you're effectively, as it were, making like a new pasuk out of it, a new ending. This is the end of the pasuk. We're not going to do that. On the side of the Gemara here, it says it's Tzaychim to Brachas Yud Beis, but it's actually not correct. If you look in Brachas Yud Beis, you'll see over there it's something similar, but it's not exact. Right over there, it talks about called Parashat Lo Paskin Moshe Rabbeinu Anan Lo Paskinon. Over there, the question of the Gemara was discussing whether or not you could say the Parsha of Balak. Right, you could say Parashach of Ka'ari and Chlavim Mikimenu if you're able to say that in Shema, because they thought maybe we should originally used to say the whole Shema should be including Parashat Balak. They said, well, that's Terchet Tzibur, it's way too long. So then they said, okay, but maybe you should just take a pasuk out of it, right? That's the pasuk of Parashach of Ka'ari. If you remember. Seeing Parashat Balak, if you see it inside of Chumash, you'll see that the entire Parashat of Balak is one parasha, right? It's one parasha. Graphically, it's one parasha. There's no stops in the middle until you get to the Benes Moav, until you get to the end of the parasha. It's all one with no stop. So if you say kol parsha lepaskina Moshe Rabbeinu and not lepaskina, if you say that we have to do the whole parsha, that means basically we have to read the whole parsha of Balak. That's not going to work. But that's again not the same exact thing as what we're saying here. Over here we're talking about a pasuk, not a parsha. You cannot make a stop in a pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't already make a stop in it. So that is the opinion of Rab. Ushmuel Amar, and what does Shmuel say? Pasuk. Shmuel says you could make a stop. Says the more really? Before we get to understanding why Shmuel says Pesach and not say Doleg, we say you're really allowed to make stops. Oh, Shmuel, I'm a Pesach. Me paskinon. Is that true that you're allowed to make stops in the middle of a pasuk? The Rabbi Chanina Kara, Rabbi Chanina, the Bible teacher, said, "Sar Gadol Haili Eitz Rabbi Chanina Gadol." He said, "I had a lot of pain next to Rabbi Chanina Gadol. Why? Well, he hit till he lifts like El to Negesh Rabban, and he did not permit me to make any stops except for the kids. Hoilu Islamid Asuim, because I'm just there to teach them." So before we go any further, I want to just give you a 2 seconds on this because who is Rabbi Chanina Kara? It's very interesting. Rabbi Chanina Kara was a Bible teacher. That's why he's known as the Kara. Kara is a teacher of Chumash, of Tanakh. Now we could debate, does Kara, Mikra, refer to Chumash only, or does it refer also to the whole of Tanakh, or maybe just Nach? So if you look at the Gemara, tells us, the Gemara in Chagiga Yadal, the Gemara tells us about the Sari Chumashin, right? The people who are masters of the Chumash, and the people who are the Sari Mikra. Over there you would see pretty clear there's a difference between Chumash and the whole Tanakh. But it's not always the case. For example, when the Gemara in Brachas Hay told us that we learn out from the pasuk that Torah mitzvah asher kasabti la'aretz, we learn out that Torah is mikra, that mikra and Torah are chumash. If the Gemara says in Kedushin on Mem Tes, if a person says that he wants to get married to a woman, almanas she ani karyayna, right, that I know how to read. So he has to read 3 psukim in chumash, and that's enough. But if he says kara ana, he has to read 3 psukim. He has to read psukim in Chumash, Navi, and Ksuvim b'diyuka. So now part there will be mashma. He has to know more than Chumash. He has to know the Tanakh. In any event, the Gemara, what you see is a couple of things that I see from this line of the Gemara. Number one, Rabbi Chanina Kara, he was given the title of a Rebbe, even though he only taught Chumash, he only taught Tanakh, whatever he taught, but he's a Bible teacher and he's still called Rebbe. That's one thing I wanted to point out. The second is that it says he has a lot of tsar by Rabbi Chanina Hagadol, and he wasn't matim to Pesach psukim, right? Because he wanted to teach the kids, and he thought it was easy to teach the kids at breaking up certain psukim. And he wasn't matir me to do this except for the Tineged Shel Beis Rabban. It doesn't say he only taught Tineged Shel Beis Rabban. So I want to prove from here that they used to learn Tanakh in a way that we don't today. I'm not saying this as a joke. I'm saying it seriously. And the third thing I want to show is the Gemara in Yavamas Mem. The Gemara in Yavamas Mem says that Rabbi Yanai was giving shir, and Chanina Kara opened his mouth and about his opinion there. He said, "Oh, he thinks Rabbi Yehuda, whatever." So Rabbi Yanai responded, Chanina, he says to him, "Pike, bar, go read your psukim outside of this Spanish, meaning get out of here." It's a denigrating line, right? You are instituting or imputing your opinions here in the regular Teresh Peh. Go stake your psukim, go read it outside the base manager, meaning that's all you are. It's a negative connotation, right? He's a Bible teacher. Okay, that's very nice, but that's not elite. Yeah. Anyhow, that's a bit of an understanding on him, but this relates to the fact that Shmuel said that you should be able to stop a pasuk in the middle. And then you'll have 2.5 psukim for the first guy, 2.5 psukim for the second guy, and that's how you divide it. Instead of doing the way Rav says, which is do 3 psukim, and the second guy does 3 psukim, but the third pasuk, the second guy is just repeating the third pasuk again. So the Gemara says that how could Shmuel say that you're breaking up a pasuk in the middle? Didn't Rabbi Chanina Kara say that Rabbi Chanina Gadol never allowed him to do that except when he was teaching Tineged Shel Beis Rabban? But otherwise, absolutely not. So it's not something so simple. So it says the Gemara now, okay. And Shmuel now responds. And Shmuel says, Ushmuel Hasam time of my. What's the reason Rabbi Chanina Gadol allowed Rabbi Chanina Kara? to break up sukkim for kids when you're teaching them, mishum delay afshar, because obviously, whatever, if you have certain long sukkim, look in the varm, you got some. The way I see sukkim in my head is I see them in the way it's written in the Sefer Torah. So sometimes you have a pasuk that's like on 4 lines, right? That's like really long pasuk, right? Sometimes you have Eish like Gerar, right? Obviously, you don't have to break that one up. The shortest pasukim are 3 words, but the longest ones could be tens of words. So so Shmuel says, what's the reason that Haggadah allowed him to break up sukkim for little kids? Because of the fact that it is necessary for them to learn. There's no other way. So too says Shmuel. Hachanami lo yafshar. So too here, it's not. There's no options. We have no option. What do you mean we have no option? We have no option other than to break up the pasuk. What do you mean you have no option? Why don't you repeat it? What do you mean there's no option? Right? He's saying there's no option here. We have 3 olim, and there's no option. The second oil is Yirakia, that's 3 psukim, and the first 2 have to share 5 psukim in Bereshis. So there's no option. We have to break up the third pasuk into half, and we have 2.5 and 2.5, and that's how we get 3 psukim for each. Says the Gemara, O Shmuel, I'm a paisek, my time I'm a darling. Okay, I understand you say there's no option, there's only 5 psukim, and it's got to be divided into 2 guys. But why don't you just repeat it? Do it like Rav said. Says no. And we have a Gezer because of the Nechnas and the Yitzin. So let's see the bottom Taisus first. So Taisus says, hey, what does it mean? Gezer Mishum Nechnas and Mishum Yitzin. Pirish. Again, both of these Taisus on this page are Pirish Taisus. But we don't have like such a strong Rashi's here. So even though Taisus is saying Pirish, he's really providing the Pirish. He's not actually just repeating what Rashi says. So especially the top tests, we'll see. Pirish said, those that come in the middle of laning, they're late. Shekar gimel psukim, that they're reading 3 psukim. V'yaru hasheni shekar pasuk echad. Right, so the nechnasim who did it, they came in late. They missed the first guy's layer. They see the second guy's laning 3 psukim. So what do they see? They see he's laning the third, fourth, and fifth pasuk of Bereshis. They didn't see what the first guy did by the Aliyah. So they don't know that he also laid the first 3 psukim. So what are they going to say? They're going to say that they're going to think the first guy only laid 2 psukim, and that's okay. And what's that? They're going to see the first guy laying 3 psukim, and then they're going to walk out. And they're not going to think, other than the fact, there's only 2 psukim left in Bereshis, and the second guy only lays 2 psukim. They're going to think that this second guy is enough for 2 psukim. So in other words, the Vardim Shema Yichnasim Shema Yitzim is reference to people who don't see the whole laning. We said already in brachas that you're not allowed to leave during laning, right? But you're allowed to leave in the middle of a laning as long as the aliyah was finished. So you have somebody who left, somebody who came, and they only know that in Bereshit it's 5 psukim. They're going to see one guy getting an aliyah of 3, and they're going to assume that the other guy got an aliyah of 2. That's the reason that Shmuel says there's really no efsharas here. We have to be delegate. I'm sorry, we have to be paisik it and laying 2.5 psukim and 2.5 psukim. So it's such a it's so efshar here that we're going to go against this idea of Moshe Rabbeinu called pasuk paskin Moshe Rabbeinu, and not only paskinan. We're going to go violate that because there's no options. There's no options. That's what Shmuel ends up saying. Fine. Now, before we go any further, let us look at the top Taisus. So Taisus says Rav Amr Doilik. It's a very interesting Taisus. Taisus is very relevant for nowadays. Taisus says, what does it mean that Rav says? Again, you repeat over the third aliyah. The third pasuk. The first guy, that's the end of his aliyah, and the second guy repeats over. It says Taisus. Perish Rishon Karav Merish. Parsha Gimel Psukim. Hasheni she'ein lakim shnei psukim medalig pasuk echad. He repeats over that third pasuk again. V'kar mimashakar Rishon. V'chei nami b'rosh chadash medalgin. That's what we do on Rosh Chodesh. That's what we do every Rosh Chodesh. You ever notice? The first guy gets an aliyah, he lays three psukim, and the second guy starts out again by Riyas Sahin, and he repeats it. So for Aktaisis v'hiksha Rabbi Yehuda bar Nasim. He says, why do we have to be delegate? The difference between Parshas Pinchas And Bereshit says that in Parashat Pinchas, there's a lot more room beforehand. You could just read the Parsha before. By Bereshit, there's nothing there. It's just white paper, white parchment. There's nothing to do. So I understand that you have to be dialing over there. But why do you have to be dialing over Rosh Chodesh? Says Taisves, the Shabbos b'chayla shalmai. On Shabbos Chalmai, what do we learn on Shabbos Chalmai? On Shabbos Chalmai, we learn the parsha of Psalacha. Right? Why do we learn the parsha of Psalacha on Shabbos Chalmai? Because after that is the parsha of the Mayadis. Right? In there is the parsha of the Mayadis about Pesach Shua Sukkot. So that is a parsha with no stop. Right? The parsha, if you look at it, starts with Psalacha, it ends right with the what do you call with what are the final words there in the parsha? Right? So that's the parsha. The whole thing includes in there the story of the second Luchais and includes there about the Mayadim. But fundamentally, it's one parsha. So that's what we start from there. Now, how many aliyahs do you have to get at Shabbos Chal Moed? 7. We don't have room for 7, so what do we do? So Kari, B'Maimadag and Amayna Karla Mila B'Parshat B'Shabbos Chal B'Chol Moed. Kari Hu Mirei Ato Omer Elai. We start leading not from Psalacha on Shabbos Chal Moed. We start leading right from 2 parashiyot before. If you're looking in a Chumash now, you would see that if you go in the Chumash, you'll see before Psalacha there's 2 parashiyos that we start on parashas of Chol Shal Moed. Each one gets its own aliyah. Each one is like a few psukim, 3 or 4 psukim. Each one gets a separate aliyah. That's the first and the second aliyahs. Why is that? Even though the parsha about the Maydis is only from Psalacha. But we have to get 7 aliyahs, so that's the way we divided it. I think the first parsha actually gets 2, but whatever. The point is, we had room and we went backwards. So why not do the same thing on Rosh Chodesh? That's Tesis' question. In other words, you could have said dialig. Let's do some repetition. We don't say that on Chodesh Hamoed. We say let's go back. So why not on regular Rosh Chodesh? Why would we be dialig? Just say go back. Answers Tesis Yesh Laim Adam Shemachik Karei Beparsha Shel Ma'ila Levishakalisa Parsha Mishtei Bechad and Yana. Because Psalacha starts out by talking about the Luchais. It's not talking about the Yom Tov. It's first talking about the Luchais. Moshe Rabbeinu to do a second Luchais. And how? What was the context of that happening? Moshe Rabbeinu talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom, getting a forgiveness for the Jewish people, saying to Hashem he wants to see him. All that. That's the context of Hashem saying, "Okay, let's now make a second luchais." So therefore, to go back and not be done, I think is no problem. Avol parsha de Rosh Chodesh. But if you look at it under the parsha of Rosh Chodesh, what's the parsha before the parsha of Rosh Chodesh? If you look in the Chumash, you'll see the parsha is Vayidaber Moshe Elokim. The only time in the Torah where it says Moshe spoke to God, and he says Yifkar Elokim Lakei Ruches L'Chol Basa Ish Alo Eida Asher Yetzi Lefnei Asher Yav Lefneihem Asher V'Yem Asher Yitzim Asher Yiviyem V'Loisia Das Raj the day so shouldn't be Katsoyin Asher Ein Lehem Raya. The whole parsha before that is about leadership. It has nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. What does the parsha of Rosh Chodesh open up? The end of Parshas Pinchas is all about the parshas of Karbanos. You start out with the Karbanos on a daily basis. Then you talk about the Karban Talmud. Then you talk about the V'yom HaShabbos, Nechvos, Menei Tzimim. Then the next thing is Rosh Shechem. And then you start them out on the way. Then Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, and Kippur, etc. That's the end of the whole parsha. So the parsha of the Karbanos of Pinchas starts out with the parsha of the daily Karban Talmud. So it says Taisa that if I go back, because I don't want to be dialect to the parsha before, I'm talking about Moshe Rabbeinu leadership changes. What? What's having to do with anything? That's why there's no option to go back the way we do on Chol Hamoed on Shabbos, and that's why on Rosh Chodesh we are dialect. So it says Taisves, L'kach in the Karban Parsha Shamal El dialect. Is there right living agenu? Is the right to what we do? Ahad the like Karina b'Chol Shabbos Parsha Chol Shabbos. So Taisa says, and this is a good explanation for why we, on regular Shabbos, why don't we then V'yom Shabbos? Why don't we talk about V'yom Shabbos? Isn't it Minyan Shal Yom? Don't we always try on Yantav to do Minyan Shal Yom? Shouldn't we have a maftir Minyan Shal Yom, something? Why do we just do the regular, we're going to learn this Mazdas Maseh? Pinchas is not far away. It's right about Shabbos. So do a maftir in Shabbos, something. And says, no, we don't do that. Why? Shanu Karim Pashas Lafiamu. We do the regular Pashas in the regular seder that we have. There used to be 3 years. Took to learn the whole Torah. Someplace they had 1 year. We do the minute all 1 year. So the fish ain't a parsha shel Shabbos shloisha psukim. The ain't loimesh and a dalag le'el. They'll have a michan and yana. Because look at the pasuk there of Yom HaShabbos. The pasuk says, "V'Yom HaShabbos shekos minei shana t'mimim u'shnei esayim says mincha v'lo Hashem v'ne'ola Shabbos b'Shabbat." How many psukim is that? Two. Says Tais, we would in fact lane Yom HaShabbos every Shabbos because it is Yom it's Mamash our anywhere that we have Shabbos. But since it's not two psukim, and we have to at least lane 3 psukim whenever we lane something, so we would have to be reading from the parsha before or the parsha after. But neither one has anything to do with this. I mean, in other words, within the wider spectrum of the carbonus of the yaim and the like, then you start out with the carbon tamid, and you end up with all the parshas of the Yom Tevim, and Shabbos is included as minyan shlayim. It's one of the days. But in terms of the context of Shabbos, it has absolutely nothing to do with anything. You're going to start learning about the carbon tamid. Yes, true. They brought the carbon tamid on Shabbos. It was the exception to the rule. So you could say, well, but that's how Tais wants to conclude. Tais wants to say that this explains why we do not on Shabbos do what we do every Yom Tov, which is have an aliyah about something of the day. And that's because the fact that the Yom Shabbos is the only part about Shabbos, the carbon tamid, even though that is brought on Shabbos, maybe it is binyan shalayim, it's not considered enough binyan shalayim, and therefore it's only 2 psukim, we can't do it because we have to learn something else, either Rosh Chodesh or the carbon tamid, which we don't want to do. Good. Now, Zot the Gemara. So where we left off here in the Gemara is that the Gemara now asks a question both on Rav and on Shmuel. The Gemara, a parsha shel shisha psukim, a parsha of 6 psukim. You can have 2 people easily read that. They each one get 3. V'shel chamisha. If it's a parsha of 5 psukim, and then the situation will be Harishan Kare Gimel, Hasheni Kare Shnayim, and be Parsha Zuba Echam Parsha Acheres. Then the first guy is going to get Ali, he should lane 3 psukim from this, and the second guy is going to get Ali, he should lane 2 psukim from this, and 1 pasuk from the next parsha. V'yesh Amrim Gimel, and there are those that say no, he has to lane at least 3 psukim from the next parsha. Why Lefish Aim Maschilim Be Parsha? Because one of the things we learn out is that you cannot start a laning of a parasha without at least reading 3 psukim from it. You can't stop a new parasha if you only read 1 pasuk. You have to at least read 3 psukim from a new parasha. So the Gemara asking both on Rav and on Shmuel that this brisa doesn't fit with either one of them. Why? Because according to this brisa, if you have a parsha of 5 psukim, the first guy reads 3, the second guy reads 2 from there, and then he starts reading the next one, either 1 pasuk or 3 psukim from the next one. But what do you not see? You don't see any suggestion of doileg, and you don't see any suggestion of paisek. So you don't see Rav or Shmuel. That's a question on both of them. Says the Gemara. According to Rav, let him say. Well, you mean you have a parsha 5 psukim, very easy. You do first guy 3 psukim, and the second guy does that third pasuk again. Push it. And Lamandar Paisik, according to Shmuel learns, you do 2.5 psukim and 2.5. So lift like so then let him do 2.5 psukim for the first guy, 2.5 psukim for the second guy. So why is it over here that we have this price that sounds like it disagrees with both Rav and Shmuel? And for the Gemara, we turn the page to Chav Chesam and Aleph. Shiny Hasam, the Islay Revacha. There's a very big difference. This price is talking about when a situation you have a lot of room. When you have a lot of room, you can encroach, meaning you can go to the next parsha. So you have 5 psukim in a parsha, great. So the first guy does 3, and the next guy does 2 from there, and then does 3 from the next one. What's the big deal? But over here, we have rules. The rules are on these Anshe Ma'amid can only land on Sunday, Bereshis and Yehirakia. That's the rules. They're limited. They can't do anything else. That's for the next days from the day 3, right? That would be for Monday. They can't do it. So they have to land Yehirakia. It's on day 3. You cannot do it on Sunday. So therefore, since they cannot do it, the requirement is that you have to figure out a means to do so within your limitations that are set out for you. So according to Rav, that means daily. According to Shmuel, that means paisik. I have to say, because it just popped in my head, it's one of those things that are irrelevant, but relevant to this, but irrelevant to the Gemara. in a sense. So what's the difference between Johann Sebastian Bach and and um, Beethoven? Yeah, if Ludwig van Beethoven and Bach, they're both amazing composers, right? But what's a fundamental difference? So the musicologist will tell you that Beethoven, he followed no rules. He made up his rules as he went. It's unbelievable music, but it's not following rules. Bach, he followed every rule, everything. And the creativity is in the fact that he managed within all the rules to still sound amazing. So, in other words, if you have rules and you have to follow rules, then you have to be creative. You say dialogue, you say paisek. If you have room, you don't need to be creative. Just encroach on the next parsha. Keep on reading. That is, in a sense, sort of a metaphor as well here. Okay, so now we're Chav Ches Amud Aleph. Zok the Gemara. Parsha Gedolah. Karen Oisa B'Shnayim B'Shachas and Musaf Mincha Karen Al Piyah. Right, if you remember, the Mishnah said that when it came to these lanings that you did, you didn't just do it by shachris. This is one of those days you lane by shachris, mincha, musaf, nihila. It's like a lot of laning that they used to do, but sometimes they didn't lane. So the more us to understand, it wasn't 100% clear in the Gemara what the language of the Mishnah was. We kind of like we buried the lead, right? We kind of jumped the what's it called pig. We jumped the pig. I forget the lashon, but we sort of gave it away by saying that you lane by shachris and by musaf. But the Gemara wasn't clear that you lane by Muslim. This is the Gemara's question over here. Says the Gemara, I'll ask you like this. Heichi kamar b'shachas uva Musaf, kairin oisa b'sefer u'mincha kairin oisa alpeh. Does that mean that when we say that when they used to lane, that they would lane by shachas and by Musaf, and they would do that out of the sefer Torah, uva mincha kairin oisa alpeh, kairin shema, and by mincha they were laid by heart. And the way we do Shema, we already explained a little bit about that kind of a background about Dvarim Shiato, Dvarim Shebasav Yato Hashem Lamalpeh. Oy Dilma says the more maybe what the Mishnah meant was Hashvatani. Bishachris Karanais of a Sefer. When it comes to Shachris, you lane that out of a Sefer Torah, but Uve Musaf, Uve Mincha, Karanais Alpeh. But by Musaf and Mincha, then you say that by heart the same way you'd say the Shema. If you look at the Mishnah, you'll see how the Gemara is not sure because the lashon of the Mishnah wasn't 100% clear. The Mishnah said like this: it's about 10 or so lines down from the white lines back on Chavav and Aleph. The Mishnah said, "B'shachas v'musaf u'v'mincha nechnasim v'karin al piyan v'karin Shema." Right. So what does that mean? Right. The Mishnah says, "Parshuk de karin esabishnayim v'aktana b'yach." I didn't give you any breaks just now when I read it. So how do you read that? Right? What we're saying is, do you read it bishachar, right? Bimusaf kamba, and then or do you read it that partially the occurrence of bishachar is kama, and then that's the Gemara's question. Where is that kama coming? Is it before Musaf or after Musaf? That's the Gemara's question. On that, the Gemara answers us, Tashma, bring a right from a Brisa. What's the right? As follows. Tashma, bring a right. The Tanya, because London, a Brisa, B'shachas, Uvim Musaf, Nichnas, and the Beis HaKnesses. By Shachas and Musaf, you come into the Beis HaKnesses, V'kairin, Kedera, Shekairin, Kol Hashana, and you do it the way you do it all year, which means what? Out of a Sefer. You read it by Musaf, again from a Sefer Torah, right? It's the only lending by Musaf we have. Uva Mincha Yachid Karanai Salpeh, and by Mincha the Yachid reads it Balpeh. Rabbi, you see? So that's a proof that you put the comma before Musaf. I'm sorry, that you put the comma after Musaf, right? Shachas and Musaf you read it from a Sefer Torah, and then by Mincha you read it Balpeh. Says the Gemara, really? By Mincha you read about Peh? Rabbi Yosef, Yachid Yachid Likras Divrei Torah Peh? Is the Yachid able to read Divrei Torah by heart? Bitzibor? In a crowd? What do you have to say? Everyone reads it Baal Peh. There's not one person who's reading it. Everyone's reading it. If you remember back what we said, back on Chavav, we discussed this point. By Taisus and Timur Dalet said, between Taisus and Gershon, that the Varm Shevesaviyat or Shon Lamar Peh. And Taisus over there asked, really? But we say all of them is Marim Kabidach Telem. We always say that by heart. So how could it be that you say Varm Shevesaviyat or Shon Lamar Peh? We do it all the time. And to Tosfos, no. The only issue of Dvarim Shevachsav Yatar Shalom Al Peh is only b'divrei Torah, not in Tehillim, not in Navi, not in other things, right? That would explain music, right? According to Shitas Tosfos, that would explain music. Then when you have a song that's based upon a pasuk, you don't have to worry about it because again, I don't mean that you don't have to worry about a pasuk like Hashem Yilachem Lachem Batem Tacharishin, right? That's a pasuk in Chumash, or Ki Karayv, that's a pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim, right? Those are little pasukim in Chumash. I'm not saying that, but that could still be an issue for Taisus. But the Mizmayrim, the psukim that are made out of Tehillim, that won't be an issue because Taisus says the only thing about Dvarim Shevachsav Yat Hashem Lamar Peh is only by Chumash, not by Nach. Rabbeinu Gershon disagrees. Rabbeinu Gershon Dvarim Shevachsav Yat Hashem Lamar Peh applies to whole Tanakh. So according to Rabbeinu Gershon, we still have an issue. But then Taisus says, okay, fine. So he explains to me there's no issue by Nach. There's only an issue by Torah. But what about by Yosha? What about us Yosha? What about all the other things? We say Shema, all these things we say by heart that are from Chumash. And so Taisus there in Tamura, what did Taisus say? Taisus says because there's a difference between being Yaitse to someone and not being Yaitse to someone. But everyone's saying it. Everyone's saying Psukkah. Everyone's saying Shema. Everyone's saying these Psukkah is all Mizmar from film. It's fine. I'm saying everyone's saying by Yosha. Everyone's saying Oz Yashir. Right? Everyone's saying Shema. You're not being mighty anyone. So if you're not being mighty anyone, that's not a problem. But that idea that being mighty someone with the Dvarim Shebechsav and you do a Baal Peh, that it's a problem, is right here. That's the Gemara right here on Chav Ches. Taisus is not quoting that in Tzimur, but that clearly is where Taisus got it, the idea that to be mighty others, you shouldn't do it. Now, it happens to be, I didn't say this last time, what do you call it? What about a darshan who quotes psukim? Is he allowed to quote them by heart? Psukim and chumash. So you're not being mitzvah anyone. What's the problem? But still, even if you're not being mitzvah, maybe you shouldn't be quoting. So there's what do you call it? The Arf Shofan, Mr. Brewer, they say that for somebody who's a darshan who wants to quote a lot of psukim, so what he's going to do? He's going to have a chumash there. He's going to be like flipping pages. Where's the page? You know. So I remember once seeing somebody who was very makbar and he had all the pages already marked out in the chumash, so he was able to like turn the pages. That's a level. That's a level of prep. Yeah, fine. But that's the person was doing it in order to avoid this issue, right? And so in order to avoid the issue, I'm an overlander, but on this I have to say, Masa Yigia Maisei Lemaisei Avoisei is nowhere that I'm with this level with Chassam Sofer. It's said about Chassam Sofer, and he knew Kol Torah Kula by heart, that he was very makbid when he gave drushes to always be turning the chumash to the pasuk and only reading from the pasuk. He wouldn't say it by heart. Even he knew the pasuk by heart, of course, but he wouldn't do it. But that takes time. It kind of like, I don't know, it adds a few seconds or whatever. That certainly is, but he did it. Anyhow, yeah. So Zot the Gemara continues the Gemara. Where are we up to? The two dots. Kol Yom Sheyesh B'Hala Ein B'Mamish. The Gemara asks a question. Question is, the Mishnah told us that if you remember, again, going back to Chavav for a second, we had a version of Rabbi Kiva. Then Ben said, "No, you're wrong. This is how Rabbi Shua taught it." And Rabbi Kiva was chayzer. What did he say? Carbon musaf. If there's a musaf on a certain day, then we don't do the laning by mincha. And if there's a what do you call it, carbon eitzim, then you don't do the laning by ne'ilam. Again, the Gemara, I'm not getting into the specifics other than what the Gemara here says, which is, why is it that when it comes to Musaf, it knocks out the Anshe Ma'amid having a laning by Mincha, and when it comes to the Carbon Eitzim, it knocks out the Anshe Ma'amid having the laning by Ne'ilah, which means that by the Carbon Eitzim, they do not stop laning by Mincha, they still lane by Mincha. Why is it that by Carbon Musaf, it knocks out the laning by Mincha, but by Carbon Eitzim, it doesn't knock out the laning by Mincha? What's the difference between the two? That's the answer the Gemara is trying to explain. That's Rashi, how he explains. And Taisus, they both explain the same thing. So answers the Gemara, Ma Hefish Bein Zelazeh. What's the difference between the Carbon Eitzim and the Carbon Musaf? That one knocks out Mincha, one does not. That's the Gemara. Hello, Divrei Torah, hello, Divrei Seifrim. I don't have time right now to go into this more, but if you look at the Gemara on the Chavav, the Gemara said Tfilas, Avos Tiknum Tfilas, where the Karbonis was instead of the Karbonis, there the Gemara in Chavav and Beis there in Brachas. So we have two opinions, but this lashon of the Gemara is Halolu Divrei Torah, right? The carbon musaf, that's Divrei Torah, and therefore that's going to knock out mincha, which is divrei Torah. Mincha is divrei Torah because vayetzi yisrael l'suach basad lefnei arev. That was tefillas avos tikdim. So divrei Torah can knock out divrei Torah, but carbon eitzim, that's not divrei Torah. So therefore, can't knock out the laning by mincha. It can only knock out the laning by the Rabbanan de Tefillah. What is the Rabbanan de Tefillah? Ne'ilah. That's the Gemara. But this idea that halol divrei Torah, we obviously don't mean it in a full halachic sense, because again, according to the Rambam, what is the Iraisa of Tefillah? The Iraisa of Tefillah of the Tefillah, that's not mincha. Mincha is the Rabbanan. Right, the idea that the obviously with mitak and tefillah is very nice, but the seder of the davening, that's the rabbanon. It's the davening itself that somebody has to daven for a minute a day, or according to the Rambam, tzara. But the levush of davening, the different times we daven, all that, that's all rabbinic. But the Gemara over here saying a line, halolu divrei Torah, which is putting it on a par of divrei Torah. That is a very interesting thing. Of course, the Rambam and the Ramban and others do not take this literally, that it's mamish da'iraisa to daven mincha. Okay, so the Gemara, the last part, the last sort of bits of the Mishnah over there that were discussing on this topic was about the different names of the Kayanim, the groups, the people that had the carbon eighthim. So we gave all the different dates and all the different times. Who cares to give us all these different dates? When they came up to make aliyah, they didn't find enough wood in the lishka. These families decided to be misnaded whatever they had to the base of mikdash. Even if the lishka has tons of wood, these will always get the right to be donating the wood to the mikdash. Hipalnu al carbon eitzim akain malavim ba'am lahavi lebeis alakenu lebeis avisenu leitim mizumanim. Right, we're going to be able to these lots that we drew on the carbon eitzim the kahanovim the to be able to bring to the base hamikdash leitim mizumanim at specified times. Right, we said it a lot of times in Av. Shana b'shana levaer al mizbech Hashem, to be burned on the mizbech of Hashem. Notice that this line of the kach hisn levim shebinim is very similar to the line we had on the top of Zayin of Beis, where it was that right, one of the leaders of the Mishmaris didn't come back, so Yadya becomes now right. They take the former Mishmaris that did come back and they make them down to 24 Mishmaris. And said even if Yair comes back, he's not going to get that top job again. And that was again the same idea. The Nevi'im, with the remaining the Nevi'im who were still different, etc., said these guys came back. They now become the head of the Mishmaris, and even if Yair comes back, he ain't going to get the job. All right, let's move on. Let's do a little bit more. It says more. So he said on the 15th day of Av, it was like a whole ragtag group of people came. It was the Kahanim, Leviim, people who didn't know their shevet, and the different people who were the figs and the stealing. So we said the more once, who are these people? Who were these people that were the Gain Ve'eli, that they stole the pestles, that they were cutting the cuttings? Who were they? What are we talking about? They made some sort of a gezerah that they can't bring wood for the mizbeach. They can't bring bikurim, and they put guards on the road to make sure that they didn't do these things, because so that the Jews shouldn't be able to be early regal. They did a similar kind of a thing. So ma'asuk sherin shabayis darvi. What did the people do who wanted to still do it? Haviu sali bikurim. They would bring their bikurim v'chifo mikitzois. They would cover up the bikurim fruit with various dried figs. V'natlom, and they would take it. The alien, they would take a pestle al kispans. They would take a pestle to go, chop up the figs. They came and she gave the parshas, and they would ask them, so what are you doing? We're going to go make we're going to make these fig cakes. We're going to use the pestle on our shoulders. We're going to go find some mortar somewhere, and we're going to go do it. Once they got past the guards, they would uncover the bikurim fruit and they would dress it up and they would come to Yerushalayim. It's the same thing like Yerav Menava tried to prevent the Jews from doing the Aliyah Regel because he wanted them to be loyal to his kingdom. So to these guards did the same kind of thing. Tana hein b'nei Salmei and Taifit. That's the same story about the Salmei and Tzaiti. What is that story? So the Gemara says, "Tana Rabban, Mayim b'nei Salmei Hanetafaiti, Amru Pamachas Gazer Machas Gzer Al Yisrael Shalevi Eitzim L'Maracha." Again, the same idea, same Gzer Rashiv Parsha. Al Drachim Der Sheish Yom Nevad Al Drachim Shlo Yal Yisrael L'Regel. So they shouldn't be able to make Aliyah. Ma Asu Yirechet Shabbai Sadar. Again, the same idea. If gets ran V'Asu Shulamis, they took the wood that they were going to bring to them as back, and they made ladders out of them. And they put the ladders on the shoulders. Once they got to the base, once they got to the guards, they said, "What are you doing?" We're going to get our birds that are in the dove cots, etc. We brought these ladders. Now, these ladders are really for the Mizbeach, but they made them into ladders so no one suspect that they were really the wood for the Marach. Once they got past them, Pirkum, they opened them up. Then they broke apart the ladders and made it into regular wood. And what we say about people like this who are mamish sacrificing so much to be able to keep the Beis Hamikdash going, that's what we talked about before, the Gemara Yumulam Ches, about this idea that we don't give the names of Rishon, we want them to rot. All right, we'll have to stop over here. Have a good Shabbos.